There is a stone plateau in the Egyptian desert that millions of people photograph every year. They point their cameras up at the pyramids. They never think to ask what is underneath them. But in March of 2025, two researchers pointed something downward instead. And what came back on the screen should not be there. 648 meters below the sand, directly under the second pyramid of Giza, the instruments detected 8 enormous cylindrical shafts, vertical, hollow, wrapped in spiral pathways. Descending more than 4 times deeper than the pyramid above them is tall. At the bottom, 2 cube-shaped chambers, each 180 meters on every side. And running between all of it, a network of tunnels stretching 2 full kilometers, threading beneath all 3 pyramids like wiring under a floor. Not tombs, not burial shafts, structures, machines, some are now saying, machines that may have been switched on before Egypt existed. This is the story of what is under the pyramids, not the pharaohs' graves we were taught about in school. Something older, something engineered, and the people who built it may not have been Egyptian at all. If buried history like this unsettles you the way it unsettles me, subscribe and turn on the bell before we go any deeper, because this one gets stranger the further down we look. Let me show you exactly what they found and why the most powerful man in Egyptian archaeology called it impossible within 72 hours. The discovery came from a technique most people have never heard of. It is called synthetic aperture radar tomography. In simple terms, it reads tiny vibrations in a structure and uses them to build a 3-dimensional picture of what is inside and beneath it, the way a doctor reads the inside of a body without cutting it open. The 2 men behind it were Corrado Malenga of the University of Pisa and Filippo Biondi of the University of Strathclyde. They aimed their instruments at the Pyramid of Khafre, the middle of the 3 giants on the Giza Plateau. What the scans returned was not a solid block of rock. It was architecture. 5 stacked, multi-level chamber structures sitting near the base of the pyramid. Beneath them, those 8 cylindrical wells, each one ringed by a descending spiral path, plunging 648 meters down. And at the very bottom, the 2 massive cubes, 80 meters per side, large enough to swallow an office tower whole. The team published their findings and issued a press release on March 15th, 2025. Within days, the images were everywhere. Then, almost as fast, the door slammed shut. Dr. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's former Minister of Antiquities and the most famous Egyptologist alive, dismissed the entire thing. He called the claims completely wrong. He said the radar technique was neither scientifically approved nor validated. He said you simply cannot see that deep into solid stone using vibrations. When the same team announced months later that they had detected matching shafts and chambers under the 3rd pyramid, the Pyramid of Menkaure, mirroring what they found under Khafre, Hawass had a single word for it: impossible. Here is the problem. The idea of something underneath Giza is not new, and it did not start with a radar scan in 2025. It started with a Greek historian 2,500 years ago. His name was Herodotus, and he traveled to Egypt in the 5th century BCE. The Egyptian priests told him something the textbooks tend to skip over. They spoke of a long-held tradition. The original builders of the region, they said, had created vast underground chambers beneath the plateau, an underworld, a labyrinth carved into the rock below the monuments. For centuries, this was treated as a traveler's tall tale, a myth, a story the priests told a gullible foreigner. And that is the pattern we are going to see again and again in this investigation. A claim gets labeled mythology. Decades pass. Then someone points an instrument at the ground, and the mythology turns out to be a map. Because in 1993, a survey at Giza found something that matched the priest's story almost word for word. Researchers reported discovering large cavities and a passage running beneath the causeway between the Sphinx and the second pyramid. One account from the find described it plainly. They said they had discovered a kind of subway used by the ancient Egyptians 5,000 years ago. From it, shafts descended more than 125 feet, opening into roomy courts and side chambers. Herodotus was not making it up. The priests were not lying. There was something down there. There has been something down there the entire time. So let us take the ancient descriptions seriously, the way these builders clearly intended them to be taken. Let us treat them not as poetry, but as documentation. Because when you do that, 3 specific clues rise to the surface, and each one starts out sounding like legend, until you look at it through the eyes of an engineer. Here is the first clue. The ancient tradition speaks of an underworld beneath the plateau, a realm of the dead reached by descending into the earth. For thousands of years, that is exactly how it was read. The underworld, the afterlife. A spiritual destination, not a physical one. A place souls went, not a place you could walk into. But the 2025 scans give that word a different shape. The 8 cylindrical wells they detected are not metaphors for the journey of the soul. They are vertical engineered shafts wrapped in spiral access ramps, descending in a precise repeating pattern. You do not build 8 identical 600-meter spiral wells to bury a king. You build one chamber for a king. 8 identical deep structures, arranged with geometric regularity, is not a graveyard. It is infrastructure. The descent into the underworld may have been real. It may have been a descent into something built, and that connects to the second clue. The old accounts describe this lower world as a place of order, of geometry, of repeating forms, chambers arranged with deliberate design rather than the chaos you would expect from natural caves. Mainstream readings treated this as religious symbolism, sacred geometry meant to represent cosmic order. The Egyptians loved alignment, loved symmetry, so of course they imagined their underworld as ordered. Except the radar found exactly that. 5 stacked multi-level chambers, 8 matched cylinders, 2 cube chambers of identical dimension, 80 meters on every side, sitting at the base of the wells. Geometric passageways connecting all of it. This is not the language of a tomb, which is irregular, cramped, built around a single sarcophagus. This is modular construction, repeated units, the signature of something planned by people who thought in measurements, who built the same component over and over because it served a function. The order the ancients described was not symbolic, it was structural. That is the second clue. The third is the one that breaks the timeline completely. The third clue is not written in a tablet. It is written in the stone itself. A short walk from the pyramids sits the Great Sphinx. And in the early 1990s, a geologist from Boston University named Robert Schoch walked into the pit the Sphinx is carved from, the enclosure, and saw something that did not fit. The walls were not weathered the way desert stone weathers. Wind and sand carve horizontal patterns, scooping out the soft layers and leaving the hard ones standing proud. The nearby tombs, known to be from the Old Kingdom, show exactly that wind pattern. But the Sphinx enclosure was different. It was covered in deep, rounded vertical grooves, channels cut from the top down. Schoch knew what makes that pattern. Not wind, water. Specifically, thousands of years of heavy rainfall pouring down the stone. And here is why that detonates everything. The Giza Plateau has been bone-dry desert since before 2500 BCE, the date Egyptologists assign to the pyramids. For that much rain erosion to occur, the Sphinx would have to predate the desert itself. Schoch's estimate placed it deep into the last wet period, somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000 years old, and at the far end, possibly back to 10,000 BCE. That is thousands of years before dynastic Egypt, before writing, before the wheel. It would mean someone carved these monuments and dug beneath them long before the civilization we credit was ever born. Not the Egyptians we know, someone before them. For decades, scholars dismissed this as fringe geology. And the criticism is real. Mainstream Egyptologists, including Mark Lehner and Hawass himself, argue the erosion comes from poor quality layered limestone, from salt crystallization, from occasional rain and dew over the dynastic centuries. They point out there is no settlement, no tools, no other trace of a 10,000-year-old civilization at Giza. Shouk's own answer is unsettling in its own right. He suggested a catastrophe wiped that evidence away. And that word, catastrophe, is where the modern confirmation gets dark. Because the team behind the 2025 underground scans does not date their complex to the age of the pharaohs at all. They date it to roughly 38,000 years ago. A researcher connected to the work, Armando May, pointed to salt encrustations and what he reads as water erosion marks on the giant blocks near the Great Pyramid, and argued that Giza was once underwater, submerged, drowned by a cataclysmic flood. The group ties the destruction of this lost advanced culture to a specific event, a comet-triggered deluge around 12,800 BCE. And that date is not random. There is a serious scientific hypothesis, supported by some geologists, that a fragmenting comet struck the planet at exactly that moment, ending the last ice age in fire and flood. Line it up, Shouk's rain erosion points to a wet, pre-desert Giza. The flood theorists point to a cataclysm around 12,800 BCE. And the underground complex, by their dating, predates all of recorded history. Three separate lines pointing at the same impossible window. A high-technology presence at Giza, building deep engineered structures before the comet, before the flood, before Egypt. So who left the machines? And why does the official record have nothing to say about them? This is where the resistance gets hard to ignore. The 1993 survey, the one that found the subway and the deep shafts, never produced the full open excavation you would expect from a find that important. The 2025 radar results were declared impossible and unvalidated within days by the same authorities who control access to the plateau. The team that produced them works from outside Egypt, scanning from a distance, because the ground itself is among the most tightly controlled archaeological sites on Earth. Permits are rare. Independent digging is nearly forbidden. And every time someone points downward and reports geometry, the response is, "Not let us go look." The response is, "That is not possible. Move along." There is even an older thread here. Decades ago, the American mystic Edgar Cayce predicted a hidden hall of records would one day be found beneath the Sphinx, holding the history of a lost civilization. Mainstream archaeology laughed it off. But the ground-penetrating radar and resistivity scans run near the Sphinx in recent years keep finding the same thing the priests told Herodotus: anomalies, cavities, voids that should not be there, something hollow under the paws of the lion. Now, does any of this prove the most extreme version of the story? Probably not. Let me be honest about the skeptic's case, because it is strong, and the discovery survives it anyway. The radar method has not been independently verified. Reading structures 600 meters into solid bedrock from surface vibrations is at the absolute edge of what the technique can claim, and serious scientists doubt it can reach that deep at all. The cube chambers and the 8 giant wells might be artifacts of the processing, patterns the software found because it was looking for them. Shouk's water erosion has a competing explanation in bad limestone and salt. And there is genuinely no hammer, no hearth, no skeleton from a 38,000-year-old engineering culture. The grand version, lost supercivilization, drowned by a comet, leaving machines humming under the sand, rests on a chain of claims where every single link is still contested. But here is what the skeptics cannot wave away. Something is under there. That part is not in dispute. The 1993 survey found real cavities and real shafts. Modern radar near the Sphinx finds real voids, Herodotus recorded a real tradition that turned out to match real geology. Strip away every wild interpretation, and you are still left with an engineered subterranean world beneath the most studied monuments on the planet, largely unexcavated, deliberately left sealed. The plainest version of the truth is already extraordinary. The builders of Giza, whoever they were, dug downward with the same obsessive precision they used to build upward. And we have barely looked. So sit with what it would mean if even the modest version holds. It would mean the pyramids are not the monument. They are the lid, the visible top of a structure that goes far deeper than the part we admire. It would mean the people who shaped this plateau cared as much about what lay beneath their feet as what rose above their heads, and they had the engineering to act on it. And if the dating skeptics are wrong, if Scotia's reign is real, and that complex truly predates the desert, then our entire timeline has a missing chapter. A civilization advanced enough to carve and tunnel and align stone to the stars, erased so completely that we built a whole history on top of its grave without knowing the grave was there. The pyramids align to the belt of Orion, but the precision of that alignment fits the sky not of 2500 BCE, but of a date thousands of years earlier, when those three stars sat exactly where the three pyramids sit on the ground. As above, so below. We have always read that as poetry. What if it was a blueprint, and the part we can see is only half of it? Which leaves the question no one in authority seems willing to answer. If the scans are right, if there are 8 spiral wells and 2 vast cube chambers waiting 600 meters down, then they are still there. Right now, under the feet of every tourist taking a photograph. And the permits to dig and find out remain, as of this moment, unsigned. The plateau was mapped. It was scanned. It was recorded by a Greek 2,500 years ago and by radar in 2025, and both said the same thing. There is a world beneath the world here, and it is still sealed, still unexcavated, still waiting under the oldest lie we were ever told. If this rewired something in you, the next investigation goes even deeper into what the official story leaves out. Watch it on screen now.